Welcome to Social Work Foundations. Today we'll be looking at the settlement house movement in this lecture. We will cover the importance of the settlement house movement historically as a family support and community development or community building social intervention. We will look at the history of the movement as well as contemporary examples. So those examples will be military families and family support centers, as well as the Arab American Family Support Center in New York City. And this is an example of immigrants being served in a large urban area in contemporary context. We will also talk about the Black settlement houses as well as the history of settlement houses for Mexican Americans. So Jane Addams and Ellen Gates Starr visited Toynbee Hall in London, and it was a European model of the settlement house. They saw many opportunities there for the families and the children involved in that center, and they were very inspired to come home and replicate the model. They then returned to their lovely Chicago with many challenges, many difficulties for immigrant families, and they moved their model into action. You'll have an opportunity to watch this video about the settlement way, and I'll look at the history as well as current and contemporary examples. This is an important video as we move forward. So Jane Addams and the Women of Hull House. Jane Addams and Ellen Gates Starr, of course, visited London, as we said, and they observed the settlement houses. They returned excited with the vision. They recognized that the conditions of immigrants in Chicago was most often characterized by highly challenged neighborhood circumstances and the many social problems of the era, to include poor sanitation, children being tried as adults in their courts, and as well as lack of basic life skills training and ability to come together and seek and solve problems collectively as a group. These immigrant communities were really living in squalor, challenged neighborhoods in which the quality of life was really, really difficult for the family and children. The family support model is developed. It's celebrated today as an important community intervention. You now find family support centers as a fixture in social work. As I said, the Arab American Center in New York City. And you also find some settlement houses in some urban locations continuing to persist today. So Hull House, the Women of Hull House. The question is, how were people of color involved? Many of the immigrants in those communities were Italians and others coming from Europe, but Jane Addams and Ellen Gates Starr and the Women of Hull House were quite enthusiastic about a number of arts and crafts projects. They were very involved with bringing arts and craft as part of their activities within their center. And this is an important occupational aspect of the settlement house movement. And here you see a book called Pots of Promise. And this is the Mexican pottery of Hull House from 1920 to 1940. So this is a little known history that Mexican potters were working at Hull House. A lot of people do not realize that Latino immigrants were served at Hull House, and they were able to engage in the pottery that they so loved and brought that skill to Chicago. So let's talk about the diversity of settlement houses, because we've already looked at Mexican Americans being engaged in the Hull House. We also have the African American or the Black settlement movement, and that was important because the settlement houses were largely not open to Black Americans. And as Black Southerners started to move to urban areas, they needed an opportunity to come together and seek the same opportunities within the settlement house. So, led by Black female activists and reformers, the settlement house movement eventually provided a place for optimism for the African American community. Black settlement houses provided an environment with culturally based empowerment initiatives celebrating Blackness and the possibility. Example, the Phillips Wheatley House in Minnesota, first such example. So let's look at Latinos and the settlement houses in Texas. So there were settlement houses serving Mexican Americans in Texas, and Houston and the Mexican Christian Institute were important in San Antonio. There were other areas in El Paso, as well as other areas on the border between Texas and the United States and Mexico. Hispanic communities offered the residents English language classes, entertainment, books in Spanish and English, arts and crafts courses. Again, those crafts courses like Mexican pottery, but there'd be other crafts, painting, maybe even music and other kinds of recreation. They had a opportunity for a Black nurse to provide services, and the Bethlehem settlement was directed by a biracial committee and had nursery and kindergarten. self-improvement club for older girls, and also occasionally maid training classes. Today, that would not be considered empowerment, but looking at education for job readiness is a part of Settlement House. The settlement activities among the blacks in Houston did not resume until some years later, when the new biracial committee was organized. Austin was a site for house activity for many Mexican Americans, and you'll see as you go on there was donations to provide Christian rooming houses for single Mexican workers in kindergarten. There was all kinds of activities and services coming together in Houston, Texas. This is also a little known history. It's not frequently discussed. But as we consider what has happened with Latinos, especially in our program, it's important for us to look for these opportunities to celebrate the influence of the Settlement House movement on Latinos, and particularly in Texas. Okay, so focal points today. So what do settlement houses look like today? They tend to be more like drop-in centers rather than places where people are living really nearby or even in the center. And so the Family Support Center systems within the United States Air Force is an important and vibrant model. You would find family support centers on military installations all across the country as well as around the world. And those organizations are very much staffed by professionals. So you'd have master's degree of social work, master's of counseling. You'd have others engaged in basic needs. You would have kind of the community chest for people that really need a quick infusion of cash, can come and ask for support. You'd have life skills educators providing classes on stress management, parenting skills, cooking classes, a whole range of activities that engage people in learning and coming together in a social support model. When it's related to immigrants, as in the case of the Arab American Support Center, those kids there have an opportunity to greater improve their English language skills. They have after-school programs for homework club. They have activities like music and art. And so each center has its own needs and means based on the mission. So with the military, we have families coming together that have the unique issues, unique experience being military families, and the fact that they have to be military or combat ready at all times. So the family needs to be supported, and the Family Support Center is oriented to that. And when it comes to the Arab American Support Center, this is the immigrant community in a large urban center where the kids are needing to adapt and adjust, the parents are needing to adapt and adjust, and we need to give them an opportunity to find that person environment fit in a way that is gatewayed in a kind and even loving sort of social services organization. I'm going to leave you with this video about the Arab American Center because I think it's an important example. Thank you.